and welcome to another episode of Ask a Pianist. My name is Andrew Ahrens, and today we'll be looking at a rather interesting phenomenon that pianists sometimes have to create. One of the biggest drawbacks to the piano as an instrument is the fact that it cannot create sound that lasts forever. There is always a decay to every note we play, and though we can prolong the decay, we cannot prevent it. Composers who wish to have a pedal point or harmonic continuum are left with very few options on the piano. The most common solution is what is referred to as an Alberti bass, which is essentially an arpeggiated chord that is continually repeated. There is, however, another solution, one which is not as common, and which I personally find much more interesting. Instead of having a flow of arpeggiated chords, sometimes a composer may simply write repeated solid chords. This actually creates several problems for pianists to examine and overcome, and today's episode will be about that. Schubert's sonatas are definitely unproblematic in terms of physical technique. For the most part, they are sight-readable, which is deceptive to a student coming to these works for the first time. The difficulty in Schubert comes from attempting to determine how best to communicate music which appears free of all embellishment. It's very direct music, and that's usually very hard to interpret and perform. His A major sonata serves as a perfect example of this. Simple, efficient music. In the development section of this movement, we have a situation where the accompaniment to the melody consists of repeated chords, and this continues nearly non-stop until the recapitulation. At first sight, the texture seems simple. Play the left hand detached, or even staccato, and the right hand melody legato. If we kept it this way, then it would be nicely uniform, but the ability to create large effects of accents and dynamic contrasts would be hampered somewhat. The usual solution to this is to use the damper pedal to emphasize moments or to help in dynamic contrast. As you can hear, however, the tailoring of pedal usage to the right hand interferes with the uniformity of the left hand accompaniment, meaning that some chords get pedaled, some don't, and some even get half-pedaled by accident, as we're changing our resonances during melodic shifts or harmonic progressions. We could solve this problem by simply playing everything with pedal, like this. But this is not really ideal either. Now the changes in articulation and dynamic contrast in the melody sound less distinct and focused. So, what can we do? In music performance, we are often called upon to think against what our instincts would normally suggest. In this section of the Schubert, the natural course of thinking would be this, that the left-hand chords are uniform in nature, and therefore they should be played in a uniform nature by our left hand. In other words, all staccato, or all legato, or all detached. This actually would work if the right-hand melodic material was uniform as well, but because it is not, this tactic of playing all the chords in a similar way actually fails. What we have to do is first find out what is necessary to make the right-hand melody function the way we want it to, and then tailor our left-hand chords to that resulting situation. The problem does not come up when we play an arpeggiated or Alberti bass, for instance, because the continuum of sound is far less distinct unless we specifically make it so. An Alberti bass blends in very easily to any texture. But solid chords always stand out on the piano regardless of what we do, so we have no choice but to find a way to make them sound uniform while still supporting whatever the melody may be doing at the time. In other words, we have to play each chord slightly differently with the intention of making them sound all the same. Easier said than done. Let's take the first little section of the melody. Now, Schubert writes an accent over the top A, so either we're supposed to make a dynamic change, like making the A louder than everything else, like this, or we're supposed to accentuate the A using time and space. Of course, it could also be a tasteful combination, like this. Whichever way we decide to do it, if we play this alone without the accompaniment, our pedal foot unconsciously might want to help things out a little bit. Let's say that we have decided that that's the way we want to play it. When we combine this with the accompaniment, we're faced with a few options. If we use pedal to help the accented note in the melody, then we get this situation. I'll play it very slowly so that you can hear the difference. If we wanted our left-hand accompaniment to sound more unified, we could play the chords more smoothly and less articulate in the beginning of the bar, so that when the pedal is engaged, the change isn't so drastic. We can refine this to an even greater extent. When the pedal is engaged for the accented note, we can play the accompaniment in a more detached manner than before, as if we are trying to negate the pedal effect. So, what we're doing is making the non-pedaled music sound like it's pedaled, and the pedaled music sound like it's not. In practical terms, most of these kinds of minute adjustments are made using our ears first and our eyes second. We listen closely to what is happening, and we adjust our articulation and pedaling to accommodate the music. Furthermore, we have to be flexible enough and comfortable enough with the music to be able to change our pedaling to suit the individual instrument or resonance space that we're performing in. Just because a solution will work at home doesn't mean it'll work in live performance. With the Schubert example, it's really quite exposed, which means that these differences in articulation can be heard by an audience rather easily. This is one of the reasons why it's so important. It's too easy to notice a pattern in our accompaniment, learn the pattern, and then let it run on autopilot as we focus our attention on playing the melody beautifully. But this is not the way to treat an accompaniment, especially if it seems like it's all just the same. Schubert gave us a texture that was relaxed and open. Now we are going to look at the opposite situation. In Alkan's Symphony for Piano, we find ourselves immediately immersed in a dark and stormy atmosphere. Repeated chords of this kind present a severe problem for the pianist, for two main reasons. They have to be played rather fast, and due to the register they're in, they have the capability of very easily overwhelming the melody if they're not controlled dynamically. Now, Alkan could have made this opening a lot easier, by marking forte and detached. Instead, he marks piano e molto sostenuto. So not only do we have to contend with a sustained melody in the bass octaves, but we have to find a way for the right-hand accompaniment to support this kind of tune. Once again, we can look at it as a combination of factors or compositional directions that we must justify, and adapt our playing to suit the conditions. First, the left-hand melody is easily played if played alone. The soft playing is done with the hands, and the sustained playing is helped with some generous pedal usage. hand accompaniment, if played alone, can also be adjusted to suit this arrangement, and it's easiest to do this using little or no pedal at all. Our biggest problem comes if we try to play this accompaniment with more than just minimal pedaling. All of a sudden, we get a sound accumulation which seems to get uncontrollably loud very quickly. What can we do about this? The buildup of sound on the piano is not only linked to our pedaling, but also what register of the instrument we're in. In the upper register, the strings are thinner, so they're not going to sustain sound on their own for as long as the thicker bass strings. If I play two notes, one in the top register, one in the bass register, at approximately the same dynamic level, you'll hear that the lower string continues to sound even as the top string fades away into the distance. The relationship in this phenomenon stays the same even when the pedal is applied, though both notes will sound for a longer time. If I were to transpose the right-hand accompaniment into the top register, one can still find a way to play softly with a generous amount of pedal. However, if I played in the bass, we find that the sound will grow into something extremely loud, even if we're trying to play softly. There's no real way to avoid this except to play with less pedal or with longer pedal changes to clear the sound. Alkan is kind to us. We can change the pedal on the first beat of the bar, emphasizing the rhythmic situation of the piece, like this. And there are also times when the chords change with the melody in the left hand, which would require a pedal clearance regardless. I'll play it slowly and with exaggerated pedaling so you can hear. But there is another solution to this situation that merits consideration, one which I use in passages like this quite frequently in other works. Many times in music performance, we are required to create the impression of something without actually doing it. This can be due to the individual performance instrument or acoustic capabilities and situations. It can be due to our own technical limits, and it can also be due to the fact that the music may have been written for a different piano altogether, and we're forced on the modern instrument to emulate a specific attribute or a failure of the original instrument for the audio effect. Alkan wrote these works in the 1850s in France, and given the nature of French pianos at the time, he was most likely dealing with an Erard or an offshoot of that design. These pianos were very clear in the bass registers, and the repetitions of chords in the right hand in this passage would not have presented that much of an acoustical obstacle. If played with copious amounts of pedal, the sound would not accumulate as much as it does on the modern instrument, so you'd end up with essentially a sustained chord which is rhythmically driven, like the sound of a steam train. Is it possible to replicate this effect on the modern piano? Obviously, yes, but it does take a little creative thinking. First, let's look at it as a harmonic continuum. Alkan wants the accompaniment to provide a harmonic foundation for the melody. This is important in order for the melody to function, and because the accompaniment is in the right hand and not the left, we're already at a disadvantage in terms of acoustic perception. I'll show you what I mean. If I reverse everything and have the melody in the right hand and the accompaniment in the left, as is traditional, we would actually have something like what we have in bars 12 and onwards. It's easy for the ear to pick up the melody, and he doesn't even have to write the melody in octaves. But the first statement of the theme is buried acoustically, so our first issue actually comes down to voicing it in a way that the melody can be clearly heard. This also means choosing specific notes in the accompaniment that are important, and fading out the redundant or not important notes. For example, the opening chord requires an emphasis on the E flat over the G, like this. Now comes the most interesting change we must make. To create a harmonic continuum of sound, we have to negate the sound accumulation while still making the harmony clear and concise. The first thing we have to do is gradually decrescendo as the chords repeat. This means that the sound either stays at the same dynamic level or retreats slightly, which is always beneficial. Then, to make the harmony clear to the ear, we actually have to slightly accent every change of chord, so that the first chord of each repeated group is loud. Then the rest of them are soft and played underneath the resonance. The most important skill that one must cultivate here is that of playing underneath the current resonance. This is necessary in many different areas of performance, but it has no more immediate and obvious effect than that here. Practice playing a chord loudly and playing repeated chords underneath the resonance. Either you can try to maintain the current dynamic, like this, or you can try making a decrescendo like this. Believe me, this technique is needed quite a lot in piano performance. Once you can do this with confidence, then bass accumulation will not be as much of a problem, and you'll be able to play the opening of this work in a way that sounds soft and sustained. This piece presents many different difficulties in terms of performance, and perhaps we'll revisit it another day. For now, keep practicing, and remember to listen carefully to the resonance table that you create. Playing over it is always easy, but playing underneath it is an art. Bye for now.